Guys, this is our third flipped lesson, and today your flipped lesson is over objects and different kinds of verbs, also known as possibly one of the hardest parts of learning grammar. Direct objects and indirect objects is not something that's really easy to figure out, but we're going to try and help you understand it. Remember, if you have any questions during this time, you need to pause and raise your hand. Like I said, this is really hard, so I would say that you need to follow carefully, write your notes diligently, and even write down the example sentences, because those are only going to help you more. So let's get started. We'll start with something called direct objects. Direct objects are what an action is sent to, or a verb. This is what transitive verbs send the action to. Just worry about the verb part for now. So how do you find a direct object in a sentence? You always start by finding the subject or the verb, and then ask yourself who or what is receiving the action or the verb. And we'll start with a practice sentence. Marian auctioned the quilt at the fair. So let's find the subject. The subject in this sentence is Marian. She auctioned it at the fair. So let's ask ourselves the next question. What's the verb in this sentence? What is being performed? Oh, it looks like it's auctioned. But now we have to ask ourselves, who or what is receiving the action? What is being auctioned? Is Marian? No, she's doing the auctioning. Is the fair? No, that's where it's happening. So there's only one thing left, which is the quilt. Marian auctioned the quilt at the fair. Let's give it another go. Mr. Dupree glazed the pot before firing it. Remember, identify the subject, the verb, and then ask who or what or whom receives the action. So what's the subject in this sentence? Hover your finger over it. If you said Mr. Dupree, you're correct. So next we have to find the verb. What is the verb or the action of the sentence? What is being performed? Glazed. And as you can see, pot would be the direct object. What or who is being glazed or is receiving the action? Pot receives the action, it receives the glaze. So now we're moving on to an indirect object. This is a little bit more difficult, so stick with it. An indirect object is a noun or pronoun that tells who or what was being affected by the action. It usually goes before the direct object. Remember, it is who or what was affected by the action. Let's look at this. Mr. Evans wrote his students thank you notes. Subject in this sentence is Mr. Evans. So what's the verb? Wrote. This is what he did. This is what Mr. Evans did. He wrote something. But what did he write? He wrote thank you notes. And this is our direct object. We ask who or what is affected by the verb. Or who or what receives the action of the verb, So thank you notes were receiving the action of the verb because they were being written. So now what's the direct or the indirect object? Which is basically the object that is being affected by the direct object. In this case, the students are the ones being affected by the thank you notes. Let's give it another try. Mrs. Clark cooked her family a delicious stew. I think you could guess that Mrs. Clark is the subject of the sentence. So what do you think the verb is? It's cooked. This is what was being done. Next, let's find our direct object. Our direct object asks who or what receives the action. So who or what receives cooked or being cooked? It'd be a delicious stew. So our indirect object is what is affected by the stew. Who or what is being affected by the stew? It'd be your family. They're the ones that get to enjoy it later. Next, we have the different types of verbs. A transitive verb shows the action and sends the action to the direct object. You need a direct object to have a transitive verb. An intransitive verb works quite the opposite. It does not have a direct object. Transitive verb example. The lifeguard warned the swimmers about the storm. So we know lifeguards are the subject. What did the lifeguards do? What is the action? They warned. That's what they did. So to find our direct object, we need to ask who or what receives the action, or who or what was being warned. And they were the swimmers. So that makes warned our transitive verb because there is a direct object that links right behind it. An intransitive verb, remember, it does not, N-O-T, does not have a direct object. I looked for the rare flower. So we know a verb says an action, so what is the action of the sentence? You looked. It does not have a direct object because nothing is receiving the action. This is the hardest part, and this may take practice. So if you have any questions, just let me know, raise your hand. I will try to answer the best I can, and we can work through some of these together.